A 40-year-old man stands outside his family's house with nothing left to his name. Two candy businesses have already collapsed beneath him, one after the other, swallowing years of his life and every single dollar he could beg or borrow from anyone willing to listen. His own relatives have stopped answering when he asks for help, tired of hearing the same promises. Bankers look at him and see nothing but a failure, a man who cannot be trusted with even a small loan, let alone a fresh start. He has spent almost 2 decades chasing one single dream, moving restlessly from city to city, watching each attempt fall apart exactly like the one before it, again and again, with no end in sight and no one left to turn to. But in his pocket, quietly, is a small, strange discovery, a simple trick with fresh milk that nobody else in the candy business has figured out yet. Something so small it seems almost foolish to hope on. Nobody believes in him anymore. Nobody thinks he will ever succeed, not after everything that has already gone wrong. Yet what this broke, humiliated farm boy builds next will end up feeding, employing, and educating hundreds of thousands of people for more than a century to come. How does a man completely written off by his own family become one of the most powerful, respected names in American business history? Milton Hershey was born in 1857 on a small farm in Derry Township, Pennsylvania. His father, Henry, was a restless dreamer who drifted from one failed venture to the next, chasing oil booms and silver rushes that never paid off. His mother, Fanny, came from a strict Mennonite family and carried the household through her husband's constant disappointments. Milton grew up watching his father fail again and again, without ever fully understanding why that pattern would soon become his own. He barely finished school. At 14, his family sent him to apprentice under a local printer, a trade Milton had no passion for. He lasted only a short time before an accident, and his own restlessness pushed him elsewhere. Nearby, in Lancaster, there was a confectionery shop that pulled at him in a way printing never did. The smell of boiling sugar, the careful timing of heat and cooling, the way simple ingredients could transform into something people were willing to pay for. He apprenticed there for 4 years, learning the candy trade from the ground up, absorbing every detail of the craft. By his early 20s, Milton believed he was ready to build something of his own. He borrowed money from relatives who trusted him and opened a candy shop in Philadelphia, timing it around the city's upcoming centennial celebration, hoping crowds of visitors would fuel his sales. For years, he worked relentlessly, certain that hard work alone would be enough to make it succeed. It wasn't. Slowly, the business bled money. After roughly 6 years of struggle, it collapsed into bankruptcy, taking with it his relatives' trust and most of his own confidence. Most people would have stopped there. Milton didn't. He packed up and moved to Denver, then Chicago, then New Orleans, then New York, trying again and again to build a business from nothing in each new city. In Denver, working briefly in a small candy shop, he noticed something the other candy makers weren't doing. The shop used fresh milk instead of the cheaper paraffin most confectioners relied on to give caramel its chew. It produced a softer, smoother, longer-lasting candy. Milton studied the process quietly, memorizing every detail, carrying it with him like a secret he didn't yet know the value of. But knowledge alone didn't save him. His next attempt, in New York City, failed just like the ones before it. By his mid-20s, Milton Hershey was broke, exhausted, and largely written off by the people who once believed in him. Some relatives refused to lend him another dollar, convinced he was chasing a dream that would never materialize. He returned home to Lancaster with almost nothing to his name, except that one piece of knowledge about milk and caramel that nobody else in the region was using. This time, something shifted. Using fresh milk in his caramel recipe, Milton's candy tasted noticeably different from anything else on the market, softer, richer, and more consistent. He sold his caramels from a pushcart at first, testing the recipe on anyone willing to try it. Orders slowly started growing. Buyers who had never heard his name before began asking for more. Painfully, gradually, the business that would become the Lancaster Caramel Company started to work. Within a few years, it wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, eventually employing well over 1,000 workers across multiple factories. For the first time in his life, Milton Hershey had real money, a respected name, and a business that no longer felt like it could collapse overnight. He could have stopped there. Most men in his position would have. Instead, in 1893, he traveled to the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, where a German manufacturer was demonstrating an entirely new kind of chocolate-making machinery. Milton stood there transfixed. At the time, chocolate was still a luxury item, expensive, imported, and completely out of reach for ordinary American families. Something about that machinery convinced him there was a way to change that. He bought the equipment on the spot and had it shipped back to Lancaster. Then he made a decision that shocked almost everyone who knew him. He sold the Lancaster Caramel Company, the very business that had finally made him successful after 2 decades of failure, for $1 million. He was walking away from a proven, thriving business to chase something no American manufacturer had ever managed to solve reliably: mass-produced milk chocolate. The process turned out to be brutally difficult. European chocolate makers guarded their milk chocolate techniques closely, and nothing Milton attempted in the beginning held up at any real scale. He spent years experimenting, adjusting the ratios of milk, sugar, and cocoa, chasing a formula that could work with the fresh American dairy available to him rather than European methods built around different ingredients. Batch after batch failed to hold its texture or its taste. But the years of earlier failure had taught Milton something most entrepreneurs never learn: patience with a process that refuses to cooperate. Eventually, after repeated trial and error, he found a formula that worked consistently. In 1900, the Hershey milk chocolate bar was introduced to the public. It was affordable, consistent, and unlike anything most Americans had tasted before. For the first time, working-class families, not just the wealthy, could enjoy real chocolate as an everyday treat rather than a rare luxury. Demand exploded almost immediately. By 1903, Milton had the capital and the confidence to attempt something even more ambitious: building an entire company town from the ground up in rural Pennsylvania, complete with comfortable homes, schools, public transportation, and eventually an amusement park for his workers and their families. Then came the test that could have unraveled everything he had built. When the Great Depression hit and businesses across the country collapsed overnight, factories everywhere shutting their doors and laying off workers by the thousands, Milton made the opposite choice. Instead of cutting his workforce to survive, he poured company resources into constructing new buildings, including a grand hotel and community facilities, specifically to keep his employees paid and working through one of the worst economic collapses in American history. It was a gamble that could have bankrupted him within months if it failed. It didn't. His workers stayed loyal, the town held together, and the Hershey name grew stronger at the exact moment so many other American companies were disappearing entirely. In 1909, Milton and his wife Catherine founded a school for orphaned boys, an institution built not from leftover charity after success, but from a deep, personal conviction that the town's prosperity should extend to children who had nothing, much like Milton once had nothing himself. When he passed away in 1945, the majority of his fortune had already been placed into that school's trust years earlier, long before anyone could have predicted how large his company would eventually grow. The man who was once broke, rejected by his own family, and quietly dismissed as a failure after almost every attempt he made, ended up building something that has now outlived him by more than 80 years. Milton Hershey's failures were never the opposite of his success. They were the exact education he needed, one painful lesson at a time, to build something that would still be standing and still be feeding people hope generations after he was gone.